Good morning, everyone. Bom dia a todos. Obrigada por estarem aqui acompanhando agora o primeiro painel de hoje no QRCA. Nós já tivemos 3 sessões paralelas de trabalhos em desenvolvimento. Buenos dias a todos, gracias por estarem aquí en el primer panel de hoy en QRCA. He tenido 3 sesiones paralelas de trabajo en desarrollo. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here following today's first panel of QRCA. We had already 3 panel sessions, parallel sessions of working papers, good discussions among ourselves. This present paper is on coloniality and decoloniality, trajectories, challenges in management and accounting in Latin America. This panel aims to extend and approximate to the accounting field some dialogues initiated at Academy of Management, the Critical Management Studies Division in the USA this year. It was a virtual conference also. So the idea is to address the dynamics of decolonization, colonization, and recolonization in a specific and interconnected context of the colonial praxis that are experienced by academics and practitioners from different countries in Latin America. We are all on business schools, and it is really important for us to talk about coloniality and recoloniality, considering the place that we are speaking from. To discuss this topic, we have a fantastic panel of guests that are participating here. Alex Faria from FGV Rio de Janeiro, Fundação Getúlio Vargas, Rio de Janeiro. Ana Rodrigues Costa from Banco de Desenvolvimento Regional, Development Bank from Brazil. Marcela Mandiola from University Alberto Hurtado de Santiago de Chile. Sanjay Lanka from Fundação Getúlio Vargas, São Paulo. Everyone will present their reflections, their research, their work on issues on coloniality in different contexts of research and practice. So we are going to have 2 hours on presentations and conversations and dialogue. We can have 15 to 20 minutes to each presenter, and then we can have 40 to 50 minutes discussing among us and with the audience. So we wish we all a great panel and a great discussion. I'm going to start. I suppose we have already Alex Faria presentation on the screen. So we can start by having Alex introducing the ideas of what was discussed in AOM, and then Ana Rodrigues, and then Marcela Mandiola, and then Sanjay Lanka. Okay? Thank you, Alex. It's on you now.
Thank you very much, Fernanda. Hello, everyone. Bom dia a todos, bom dia a todas. É prazer estar aqui. So it's a pleasure to be here, to have this opportunity. Hi, Marcela. Hi, Ana. Hi, Fernanda. Hi, Sanjay. Yeah! In solidarity with everyone facing this pandemic violent period. Thanks, Fernanda. So I'll start getting back to this idea of expanding something that we started doing on the Academy of Management meeting this year, in which we brought to one of those sections of that conference, which is the professional development workshop, a debate on our concerns and also our practice on perhaps the still absence of debates and some kind of knowledge on those dynamics involving decolonizing and colonizing. And so that's part of what we're doing here. We are trying to extend that debate, which was given for a privileged group of people who are capable of paying the fees and belonging to the Academy of Management, and bring it to this forum of Latin America, sustained by people like Fernanda, Silvia, and other organizers, this debate to make it accessible and also for us to learn from the audience. So the idea is to expand that decolonizing, colonizing workshop, now not only on management, but also on accounting knowledge by exploring together this case of the Academy of Management 2020. I'm representing here FGV EBAP, and I'm also representing the Colonizing Alliance, which is a group who has been working on decolonizing, colonizing activities and practice for some time, in which I count with Marcela as one of the members of this alliance, and some other people, some other great people who perhaps are not here today. Okay, so next, please. Thank you. So anyway, so that was the title of the workshop at the Academy, and it was proposed by myself and Professor Ninhuj Jamula Madaka from Indian Institute of Management in Calcutta. And it's a continuation of several attempts. We have been trying to set dialogues between critique and decoloniality, which is not an easy job. From within the CMS division. By the way, the CMS division, who nowadays is being run by a number of wonderful scholars and practitioners, such as Professor Fernanda Sauerbrunn as well. So in that workshop, we had together not only Ana Costa, who is here again, and Marcela Mandiola, but also Professor Martin Brigham from Lancaster University Management School, and Paulo Faveri. Well, today they're not together with us, but now we have a better group, perhaps, we're enlarging this, having the company of Professor Sanjay Lanka, who is also so invited, not just to help us, but also to take some leads in this ongoing project. So next, please. So our question is, it starts with why to embrace the colonized dynamics. And we have this understanding that there is a radicalization of this totality that we call modernity, coloniality, which comes together. Actually, it comes together not exactly being followed by, but actually it comes together in terms of dynamics of appropriation that inform modernity, coloniality itself. So it comes together with the resurgence, insurgence, emergence of alternatives, borderlands, and also, of course, border practitioners and scholars, all struggling somehow and in solidarity for other ways of being, thinking, knowing, theorizing, analyzing, feeling, acting, living, and conferencing for us all. That's the proposal. That's why we are here, and that's the big picture we are dealing with this simultaneity of this totality and some other, let's put this way, some other totality otherwise. And of course, let's put this way, given that critique itself, at least the dominant critique we know, also belongs to modernity. Most of the time we're talking about critique. When we are at CMS, we're not just talking about some kind of disembodied or disembedded critique. It's very much Western, male, Eurocentric, modernist critique with lots of, let's put this way as well, contaminators or some other constituents that belong, or at the end of the day, become part of critique, as they say at CMS, a large umbrella, or perhaps a broader and larger umbrella. So in those contest dialogues, which are very much practical, most of them unnoticed or not exactly accounted or even researched by ourselves. The coloniality, the colonization, the colonizing, the colony, whatever, it keeps emerging and resurging in those attempts of having the right to exist or to re-exist in increasingly interconnected selves that exist in the South, and more problematic, I mean, of an increasingly unequal, heterogeneous, and discriminatory North. So it's a kind of need that we have not only to get to this dialogue, to make it uncovered, to make it accessible, to make it researchable. But not only the South that we think it belongs to Latin America or to exist in Latin America, but particularly in the South, which are everywhere, and particularly in the North. So that was our contribution at that time of bringing this to that North, anyway, at Critical Management Studies at the Academy of Management. So it's not necessary either just to keep or to stick to within management organization knowledge, given that accounting is also one of those fields that can be addressed, embraced, and extended in this kind of collective initiative. Not only collective, a solidarity initiative. Next, please. So that's the transition, as you can see in the slide. The Academy of Management moving towards the QRCA. Thanks, Fernanda, for making it possible. And it involves many of unknown praxistic or practical embodiments involving those dynamics, such as the intercultural pluriversity in the Andean region, here in Latin America, the decolonizing university in place in South Africa, the popular university of social movements, also very much connected to Latin America, well, and also some other initiatives that come together through modernity and those decolonizing, colonizing dynamics, such as the Decolonizing Business School webinar that was held at CAS Business School. And it was done last year in the continuation of response from the North or from the West to the colonial condition, in that case, embodied by the murder of George Floyd. So all those initiatives that we struggle within, we live somehow those attempts or those practices, but we do not problematize much. They all embody what we think, those under debate dynamics of colonization, decolonization, or if we wish, decolonizing, colonizing, or if you can make it better, decolonizing, recolonizing, colonizing, and perhaps redecolonize. That's what we're talking about, which take place within and outside academy and organizations. And that's very much concern from our standpoint, such as those who have been practicing those dynamics, those authors and practitioners living those dynamics in the South, in the North, when they claim that North Atlantic imperial states can no longer control and manage the monster they created. So it means that it's very much important for us to take into account that we're talking about the planet, and also talking about some reframing of managing and controlling what we're calling the monster, particularly because we're enacting with more attention the darker side of this monster. But of course, I mean, if you don't see just the darker side of this monster, we can see and understand better how difficult it is becoming for any attempt of managing and controlling, and perhaps for us also to think and act on controlling and managing otherwise the monster which has been created. And that it comes also with those announcements from South Africa with this idea that there is an agenda worldwide. I mean, the colonizing does not belong to the colonizers. The colonizing or the colonization, it belongs to many constituents, especially those constituents who are capable of reactivating in a constant fashion decolonizing machine. So it's an agenda. It's very difficult to think, as Fernanda was suggesting, that from these embodiments that we live, that reproduce the colonial condition, we are not part of the agenda, both the agenda itself and the agenda otherwise. So that's what we're standing for. And that's why decolonizing itself remains a contested term, consisting of a heterogeneity of viewpoints, approach, political projects, and normative concerns. And that's the kind of, let's say, we are struggling to take part into. Even though, as it happened in our attempt of doing so at the Academy of Management, it's very problematic to think that we as academics might be the ones to represent decolonizing lived by the others. Of course we are the others, but of course we are not. Meaning that it's very much true that part of the decolonizing agenda in the academic settings that we have been pursuing also reproduce dynamics of appropriation and sometimes expropriation, particularly of those who are not obviously present at this conference, the ones who are not accounted by the fields that we account for. So that's why, and I'm going to repeat it, and I'm going to make it better, and I'm inviting us to make it better in this collective, which was ahead of that attempt of dialogue with the Critical Management Studies Division, Western Mayo Colonizing, Decolonizing, Critical Management Studies Division at the Imperial Academy of Management setting, in which we have to speak in English, in academic English, for decolonizing, with lots of contradictions, which are exactly the ones that we try to sort out with the absent order, and that I'm going to explore in the next slides. Please, Fernanda, thank you. I hope. So the next one, please. Right, so, okay, before getting to this way of dealing with those problems that we are addressing here, so try not to enunciate and talk about, but also walk the talk on how to make it. How is it possible to talking about decolonizing given the colonial condition that we reproduce? So anyway, so these were the objectives that we presented at the time that we submitted the proposal. So it was very much about talking, which was on debate-specific and interconnected context of practicing, which is much more praxis anyway. But back, please. Oh, anyway, okay, sorry, Fernando. Okay, right. I'm almost there. Thank you. It's difficult not to handle these slides.
Tawan, o Douglas, por favor, volta para o slide que o Alex estava. Esse aí. É esse, né, Alex?
Next, please. Next. Douglas. Okay, Douglas, stop now, please. Obrigado. So those interconnected contexts of practice and situations like Sadi Vidar likes to enunciate. To create further conditions for a management organization knowledge system engaged with this majority in a world in which many worlds exist, and exploring specific embodiments of those struggles, in which, in this case, were about global learning education conference and global management in terms of practice as well, such as Ana Costa is going to explore. So let's see. The next one is, how it changed from the proposal to the act itself by finding a way of dealing with those dynamics in a more practical fashion. So it comes in the next slide. So we had to recognize that for this expansion of this let's say, reappropriation of decolonizing, colonizing dynamic. It's not something new, of course. I mean, most of or many movements within the academy itself and outside the academy in different parts of the world in the 60s and 70s, they had this kind of dynamics as a major issue, but with the transformation of the university system in a more radical fashion, what we have to do now is to expand and reappropriate this legacy. It's not, we are not inventing anything. We are used to say that all this dynamics has started in 1492, so it's our obligation to bring it back, particularly if we engage with those others who have been doing it. So for those practical dialogues with those privileged Academy of Management members from different parts of the world, all interested in decolonizing matters, and of course belonging to the agenda, demanded from us not to exclude non-privileged actors living everyday decolonizing dynamics almost outside the predominantly white male academy. So what we did was we had to run a workshop, a pre-workshop, the real workshop, the deep workshop, the workshop otherwise, with members and allies of an NGO in Brazil, Galpão Aplauso. Well, we might call Galpão Aplauso a kind of Minga, Marcela, for investigating colonizing and decolonizing dynamics underpinning our joint initiatives with this, let's say, embodiment of decolonization outside the academy, which perhaps I had the privilege of keeping joint initiatives, but very much aware of the number of contradictions and mistakes that I have been reproducing. So we had to talk with them to learn better or to relearn or to get back to memory on how to deal with those extractive traditions reproduced by the academy itself, even the decolonizing academy, even by the decolonizing knowers, of this idea of learning with others and learning from the South. So anyway, we got some practical ideas on how to do that. And also we are very much accountable for them now. We have to get back to tell us the number of contradictions, mistakes, and practice that we are doing at the palace, which is the Zoom palace of the academy nowadays. And also we had to get into some kind of, let's say, more accessible and everyday activities involving not special constituents like Galpão, but I mean, we are everywhere dealing with those dynamics, such as BNDES practitioners, I mean, now today represented by Ana Costa, and at that time also with the company of Paulo Faveri, and IMPM Academic Leadership, which is a management learning program, which was represented by Martin Brigham and myself, in which we try to offer engaged presentations to highlight the impossibilities, much more the impossibilities rather than the possibilities of both decolonizing management and education research. And in the case of Ana Costa, development management. And we had to get or to embrace with reflexive and collective reconnections with this recuperation or this restoring or reappropriation of decolonizing, colonizing praxis, which was very much encouraged by our dialogues with Galpão Aplauso. Well, they were very generous, saying, okay, go for it. You're going to make lots of mistakes, but we can amend it afterwards. And by the way, talking about those mistakes and the problems faced by the global North in this uncontrollable dynamics, because it does not have the right to exist as a scholarly space, we set the case with a kind of ambitious argument with Marcela that Laemos organizers, with at least a number of people, could not avoid the troubled interruption of that global, in vertical commas, conference due to this increasing radicalization of decolonizing and colonizing dynamics. Well, it's pretty much clear that our counterparts in the North are not capable of managing because it has become unnoticed anyway. But it has not become unnoticed in Chile in particular, and not only in Chile, but particularly in Chile. There is much for us to reappropriate in terms of unnoticing everywhere about this constant resurgence and emerging of the colonizing practice in management and beyond, which has been, let's say, immensely run by Marcela Mandiola and lots of colleagues. We all know about them. And all those colleagues, they surprised a lot the holders of the House of Knowledge, in particular in the case of Eagles, when they brought to the fore something that is uncontrollable. And then when it becomes uncontrollable, when expropriation and appropriation becomes impossible, well, they decide to interrupt. Well, in our case, it's exactly the opposite. We're going to make otherwise. We're going to continue. So that's the spirit of this workshop. Now, not only with the, let's say, companion of Professor Sanjay Lanka from FGV, lots of us all circulating around FGV here, and also Fernanda Sauerbrunn. I'm very much keen that telling to the absent Galpão, Applauso, and constituents, we are somehow in safe hands. I'm very proud of doing so, of being in great company. So that's what we'd like to keep moving and keep talking with the audience of this panel. Yes, I don't have any other slides. I mean, I have on the left just to show that that's Galpão. And the other is Chile, our Chile otherwise everywhere. And that's why we have been insisting on keeping calm and decolonize, given that the more you decolonize, perhaps the more you are colonizing. Keep calm, keep prudent. Let's engage with those dynamics. So, gracias, thanks, obrigado.
Fernanda, você está no...
Okay, sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Alex, for your presentation and fantastic words. Several ideas and topics about this way in which, by trying to decolonize, we are even more reinforcing colonization, not only from the place we are talking about, but by the excluded other that our academic systems keeps apart and keeps with a different sort of autonomy and engagement and appropriation and reappropriation of knowledge. I'd like to ask Ana Rodrigues to present her part, her practice in BNDES and her thoughts. Thank you, Ana. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Well, bom dia to everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Fernanda and Alex to have the opportunity to participate in this relevant panel and to have the chance to share and debate my reflections as a practitioner and not in an academic hard way on how to incorporate decolonize, colonize dynamics on a daily basis as a development manager. Those are critical reflections of a middle manager of the Global South working at a state-owned development institution, the Brazilian Development Bank. Then try to act prudently and use words tactically to be listened and to make things happen in a more decolonizing way. It was the way I found out to go ahead resisting but moving. Really embracing decolonizing dynamics as critical to act, enact, or even be acted upon, but with less or no subordination. This means to me, do not freeze, aiming to resist in a contributive way. Since 2017, I'm working on these reflections in a more organized way. When I had the opportunity to embrace International Master's Program for Managers, IMPM, dealing with, for the first time with management education that is not managerist, not decolonizing either, but capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism are seldom addressed at IMPM. IMPM is a quite diverse embodiment against the primacy of knowledge over social practice or actions that create conditions for needed insurgencies, translated in the North as emergence and critical reflexivity. I've learned at IMPM that being in a mode of reflection in action, or also on action, in a collective reflect mostly with colleagues and teamwork, that it is much about reflexive reflection. When you think that it's more transformative and emotional than contemplative and rationalized. We foster that way awareness of assumptions and bias, allowing us to open up possibilities to build and rebuild knowledge situated in a context and in the historical moment we lived in. So those are critical reflections embedded in the perspective of lived experience of a middle managers of the Global South working at BNDES. And they were also built on academic knowledge constituted by a range of critical studies to bring light and voice to a hidden or invisible debate about management and development in a context of social, economic, and cultural inequalities and oppression. Considering the reinforcement of the neoliberal agenda in Brazil since 2016, with the radicalization of colonizing dynamics against public institutions as BNDES, reinforced by the fiscal state crisis and the global crisis of capitalism, that is a delegitimization and shrinking of the public sphere, and development administration, it was also shrinked as a field of study and professional in Brazil and I think abroad. It's worth remember that even in a context, even in the context of this global pandemics we are living, with the return of the relevance and relegitimization of state actions and state expenditures to confront the consequence of all over the world problems that COVID-19 bring to us, in terms of management, there is almost nothing, except the reinforcement to managers and the so-called triple bottom line balance, renamed nowadays as stakeholders capitalism. However, it maintains the same assumptions was who rules is the consumer market or investor market. The difference now is that they changed their mind. They say that the difference that they changed their mind now to be less utilitarian and more concerned on climate change and social issues. And in consequence, those companies will add more value and profits in the long run. This view just brings them a discussion on which indicators or KPIs should be created to measure and manage it, with an underpinned belief that to achieve organizational success is by management solutions based in rational science and practice, with notions of timelessness, controllability, and universality in companies and maybe in countries. Thus, the market-driven approach continues. Once it's necessary to price any social relation to measure, and then only what could be priced would count. All the rest will continue invisible, and inequality and oppression will not decrease, but we will not decrease, and we are risking here the decrease also of democracy ideals, because we are privatizing some options, some choices in the hands of some companies. So have in mind those questions and the discovery of critical thinking in management, learning within the IMPN to put forward collective efforts within and outside my organization to foster multiple alternatives beyond managerialism or colonized and so-called benchmark techniques seem as the only way we have. I came up with some quotes that are in the screen now that are simple, but are based on this complex debate that is still open and must be taken forward, as well as they guide me on a bare decision-making daily life as a manager. Those quotes means to have a sense of direction and experimentation, to look past similar situations to learn, without forgetting to see its uniqueness, to be empathetic to other points of view and to be aware of the political attunements and conceptions that are around them, as well history and power relations. At the same time, to take time to build resilience or resistance in a prudent way, embrace uncertainty and anxiety, to reflect and be able to listen to new opportunities, but without denying lived experience, institutional values, and the development context we are surrounded. We need to see theory and practice as horizontal and symmetric knowledge to foster a critical view of both. Participating in practice is consequently a way to acquire knowledge, but also modify it, change, or perpetuate such knowledge. A practice-based theorizing arises from multiple perspectives and negotiations, then delegitimizes the univocal narrative. We do not have power to dismantle the master's house with the master tools. Hence, prudence is a crucial issue to repoliticize development administration through non-radicalization of decolonized, recolonized dynamics. Debate in a process of critical dialogue is not a waste of time, because it's an attempt to understand the nature of our predicaments and the means to engage in the transformation of current reality, thus an attempt to not perpetuate conditions that reinforce inequality and exploitation. The challenge to deal with the market-driven orientations that we have on a daily basis at where I work made me try to build a kind of atmosphere in my department with my team with an integrative combination of critical analysis and collective action, but in practice without disturbing too much our ongoing activities, but improving them once the atmosphere in the department was both of anxiety and a place of comfort, since we could deal with contradictions as a tool to foster creativity and do not freeze. The embrace of decolonized, colonized dynamics to develop management was to be more critically reflective and politically engaged, accepting and embracing the normality of tensions in all levels, exploring them by creating meeting points and harnessing them as force for creativity to open up new approaches. The problem is that managers are mostly educated by a management thought that defends scientific management and specific management skills and techniques, what makes difficult to lead the institution to a more decolonized understanding of development. If managers do not bring reflection to the discussion, mostly about political, economic, and historical context, the growing of use of managerialism practice will lead public institutions to embrace more and more market solutions, being limited to those assumptions. Then the need to develop discussion, reflections, endogenous, local development, counter movements, historical coloniality of knowledge, and the global politics and governance, and non-managerialist practice is relevant to a middle manager at developed institutions situated at a developing country, to better understand and really confront market-driven solutions and build awareness of power relations and politics, avoiding abstract and historical actions or inactions. Collective action based on the share of collective action based, we built at the department was on the share of values and beliefs. It was the base of my reflection and action with them, because the questions and dilemmas I had to face were not answered alone by myself. I worked with a team that reflected and answered. My role was given space for reflection, inputs in an eternal ongoing work, where I seek to provide personal and organizational cover to the team to ensure they will be listened and encourage them to bring different perspectives to the current demands from superiors, trying to answer them in a satisfactory way, but with our critical point of view, aiming resist in a contributive way, always trying to bring context and assumptions to discussions and awareness of the biases involved, more than just figures. Then we can try to continue enact possibilities and talk to each other in a more development-driven or pluriversal language. Next, please. So that's the slides I exactly asking for what's next, having all this, and what are my concerns right now? So why does it matter for us reflection about practice with the realm of development management, building up a more open-minded and reflexive thinking and challenging the historical coloniality knowledge? Because there is a return to the use of industrial policies, including and mainly in developed countries. That was even more reinforced after the global pandemics, as we can see. Besides that, more asset managers are incorporating the environmental, social governance, the ESG agenda in their investment strategies. It is said that this approach aligns with the positive financial returns and sustainability. Environmental, social, and governance criteria are an increasingly popular way for investors to evaluate companies in which they might want to invest, companies and countries. So as seen before, what those trends exactly means in terms of national or regional development. Private sector decision with a sole assumption that listening to stakeholders besides the shareholders will take us to the development to everyone. So those two trends show the relevance to have discussions, debates among academics and practitioners in a reflexive mood with the decolonized dynamics about management for development. To be aware of development challenges and the context of delegitimization of development countries' institutions. Then we have to reinforce capabilities to knowledge creation and discussions of epistemology and identity, with future investigation on how to work on production and reproductions of knowledge in practice. That can be open a way to develop institutions to find a way to enlarge interactions with government, local governments, scholars, companies, public, etc. To build a field with standards and values to promote administrative and governance principles, supportive of democracy, in a way that both practitioners and scholars could establish a professional field of multidisciplinary inquiry and practice, and redevelop development management as a theory and a professional practice that embrace those dynamics of decolonization and colonization as everyday concurrent process, aiming to build a pluriversal management for development, to foster possibilities to the future instead of destroying or shrinking them. Thank you very much, and let's do the debate. Next, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana. Thank you, Ana. Excellent, excellent speech. It is amazing to see that effort in doing, having a critical reflexivity within BNDES, a government institution. I have several questions for you. I think that it's better for us to move to Marcela Mandiola's presentation, and then we discuss everyone together at the end. So, Marcela, please. Douglas, please. We have Marcela's presentation to project. Marcela is going to present in Spanish, and we're going to have subtitles in English.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Marcela. Bienvenida a la conferencia.
Muchas gracias. Gracias, Fernanda, por la invitación. Gracias, Alex, Ana, por seguir avanzando en este esfuerzo. Y gracias también a Sanjay que se nos une. Ojalá de ahora y para siempre. Todos serán bienvenidos. Y quiero agradecer también la posibilidad de poder presentar en español, que tiene que ver con la posibilidad de complejizar las cosas y de dar cuenta un poco también desde la praxis de los terrenos en los cuales pisamos, ¿no? En donde, si bien podemos usar un lenguaje que intentamos sea común, ese lenguaje también es una vía que tiende a invisibilizar nuestras diferencias. Entonces, bueno, hagamos un esfuerzo de tender puentes y usar estas complejidades, ¿no? En una conferencia principalmente orientada hacia Brasil, donde la mayoría de los colegas son de ese país y hablan portugués, usamos slides en inglés y yo hablo en español, todo al mismo tiempo.
Perfecto.
Esa es la colonialidad y la decolonialidad. Bueno, como decía Alex, estamos tratando de convertir estas experiencias en una praxis, en hacer una reflexión al mismo tiempo que vamos andando respecto de estas dinámicas de colonización y decolonización y recolonización, y de ver cómo se da. Entonces es una reflexión en voz alta, la verdad. Estamos compartiendo un proceso al tiempo que se da, con las complejidades que él tiene. Es una maravilla escuchar a Ana, en la profundidad de las reflexiones que se hacen desde la práctica. Es una maravilla también establecer lazos con ella y continuar el trabajo y poder de alguna vez ir mostrando puentes también entre ese abismo, ¿no?, que construimos entre academia y práctica. Muchas gracias, Ana, en particular. Entonces, yo quisiera compartir básicamente en esta presentación, continuando un poco las inspiraciones que vienen de las presentaciones anteriores, algo de reflexión sobre el proceso que vive Chile, mi país, desde hace un tiempo, y que desde algunos puntos de vista se ha llamado como Chile despertó, Chile woke up. Lo presento ahí no solo entre comillas porque estamos hablando de algo que se dice, ¿no es cierto?, sino que porque también yo quisiera presentar y transmitir la fragilidad de esa aseveración. O sea, aparentemente parece que despertamos, quién sabe. Pero la idea es mostrar cómo este proceso de lo que va ocurriendo en Chile en el último tiempo nos permite dar cuenta de estas tensiones de colonización, decolonización y yo diría también recolonización, cómo se mantienen en la práctica, cómo se mantienen en la calle, cómo tensionan todo lo que hacemos y darnos el tiempo y el espacio para dar cuenta de ellas, hacer sentido de ellas, conceptualizar y conceptualizar también, ojalá a través de distintas formas de conceptualización y no capturar esas experiencias y de alguna manera, no sé, secuestrarlas y estandarizarlas en las vías de comunicación tradicionales de la academia. Entonces, para poner un poco en contexto, en la siguiente lámina, por favor. Hablamos en Chile en este momento de lo que está pasando desde hace un año ya, conocido como el 18 de octubre, 18O, que lo estamos entendiendo, lo estoy entendiendo acá como una etapa más, ¿no?, en esta tensión colonizadora, decolonizadora y recolonizadora. No es una experiencia por sí sola en sí misma, no es la culminación ni el cierre de un proceso. Entendemos que es una etapa, históricamente se puede decir que el estallido social del 18 de octubre viene a recrear experiencias de 100 años atrás, de 50 años atrás, bueno, vemos que se repite. En particular, aquí estamos hablando de conflictos en Chile que adquieren relevancia respecto de la redistribución de la riqueza, la inequidad económica y la injusticia social. Básicamente, esos son los temas que dan cuenta hoy día y que son temas, por supuesto, que no son originales, no ocurren solo en nuestro país, sino que tal vez en Chile son más dramáticamente evidentes, ¿no es cierto? Entonces, en particular, han hecho crisis en el ámbito del empleo, en la experiencia de los estudiantes y la educación, y también en términos de las pensiones, ¿no es cierto? El modo en el cual las personas mayores acceden a la materialidad posible de sus vidas en el último tiempo. Esas son las experiencias donde más se ha hecho evidente esta inequidad. Entonces, el 18 viene a ser un elemento más en un proceso que se inicia a lo mejor de manera más clara alrededor del 2011, donde comienzan, en primer lugar, las manifestaciones estudiantiles. Son los más jóvenes los que primero salen a la calle y rompen las estructuras de comunicación, rompen el silencio y la aparente tranquilidad de un equilibrio sostenido con mucha dificultad, y salen a decir entonces que el sistema educacional no da cuenta de las necesidades que hay en el país, y a presionar por cambios que tienen que darse a niveles amplios y profundos. Los estudiantes se comienzan a manifestar en realidad en 2006, pero el 2011 se dan los momentos más fuertes en ello. Todas estas manifestaciones aplacadas por procesos recolonizadores que se instalan rápidamente y no terminan de ser escuchados cuando rápidamente se despliegan estrategias que tienen que ver con más de lo mismo, que tienden más bien a callar voces que a resolver problemas. Se suma entonces en el año 2016 otra manifestación tremendamente relevante, que es la que en Chile se llama No Más AFP, que intenta poner el dedo en la llaga del sistema privado de pensiones chileno, una de nuestras exportaciones no tradicionales, que se ha presentado alrededor del mundo como la panacea en la administración y la gestión de los dineros de las pensiones, y que definitivamente ha terminado ser un rotundo y profundo fracaso para el objetivo que se supone debiera cumplir, ¿no es cierto?, que es la administración de las pensiones, pero entendemos que ese sistema privado es el que solventa y el que sostiene el mercado neoliberal en Chile. Entonces no cumple con aquello que debió cumplir, pero sí cumple, digámoslo, con mantener una liquidez circulando que permite el enriquecimiento de los más ricos, porque el dinero que sustenta el movimiento del mercado en Chile es el dinero de las personas utilizado a través de la empresa privada. En particular el negocio, desde algún punto de vista se puede pensar que es una excelente idea, pero para quienes buscan enriquecerse utilizando el dinero de otros de alguna manera, como una forma de subsidio, que no ha logrado retribuir a las pensiones de las personas mayores. Todos estos elementos, juntos con muchos otros, son los que estallan el 18 de octubre y se instalan ya como una petición más transversal, más amplia, y que logra sostenerse. Lo interesante es que logra sostener su manifestación en la calle y se resiste por un tiempo largo, incluso hasta el momento de hoy, a formas tradicionales de encapsulamiento. Y logra promover algo que hasta ese momento era imposible e impensado en Chile, que era la consideración de un cambio constitucional. El cambio constitucional aparece ofrecido desde las instancias de poder, no porque estuviesen convencidos de su necesidad, sino que en ese momento parecía ser la gran posibilidad de aplacar un movimiento callejero que se resistía a ser siquiera comprendido por quienes están en el poder. Entonces, lo que se hace relevante e interesante de mirar acá es cómo es la capacidad de los actores sociales, cómo se ha ido fortaleciendo a través del tiempo, y termina en una demostración que ha sido muy difícil de conceptualizar desde las convenciones tradicionales. Si bien nuestro presidente comenzó rápidamente a hablar de un enemigo poderoso que estaba detrás de estas manifestaciones, lo que hay ahí es el intento tradicional de hacer sentido con los mismos recursos. Imposible pensar en una manifestación callejera que no esté liderada por un alguien, por ciertos alguienes, a lo mejor siempre los mismos, con intenciones conspirativas. Hay una ceguera frente a la potencialidad de la manifestación colectiva que responda a formas de organización que hoy día nosotros no conocemos y que son las que, de alguna manera, en este esfuerzo, nosotros estamos tratando de empezar a conocer. La siguiente, por favor. Entonces, de esta experiencia, de esta praxis, yo quisiera quedarme con 3 ideas, tres contenidos, 3 momentos de esta praxis que me parecen relevantes y los planteo aquí como preguntas abiertas. Por supuesto que no tenemos todavía respuestas frente a esto. Primero, la respuesta que dio el poder institucional al estallido callejero, que fue: no lo vimos venir. We didn't see it coming, que cuesta creer que no lo vieran venir. Es decir, no lo quisimos ver venir. Está lleno, por supuesto, la prensa escrita, bueno, los medios en Chile y las reflexiones también académicas de evidencia que muestran que era muy difícil no ver venir. Es esa ceguera la que nos parece interesante. Luego, esta permanente e instalada tensión de territorialización, deterritorialización y reterritorialización, que es lo que ocurre en la calle, lo que se mantiene ahí, ¿no? Esa pelea que todavía no logra articularse de maneras conocidas. Y a lo mejor, como un tercer momento, un tercer espacio, lo que nos ofrece la aspiración ética y normativa de esta manifestación que habla de hasta que valga la pena vivir. En el fondo, la insistencia de esta tensión y de este esfuerzo de colonizador, recolonizador, hasta instalar alguna otra articulación temporal, momentánea, incompleta, por supuesto, pero que ofrezca condiciones de vida diferentes a las que hay ahora. La siguiente. Entonces, respecto de no lo vimos venir, da cuenta de esta colonialidad macroeconómica instalada en Chile y su modelo de desarrollo que no alcanza a las mayorías. Se habla de Chile como un oasis, se habla de Chile como un milagro económico, los números de Chile, las cuentas de Chile parecen ser positivas y satisfactorias, pero son parciales. Se cuenta lo que se quiere contar, se mide lo que se quiere medir. Como representación de una tendencia central, vemos solo promedios gruesos y no vemos desviaciones estándar, así de simple, ¿no? En el fondo es muy precaria la representación que se quiere dar de un éxito económico. Entonces esta prosperidad está construida sobre la precariedad y la dependencia de otros. Y es esa relación la que sostiene una prosperidad. No hay una prosperidad real, no hay una prosperidad masiva, sino que para ser ricos necesitamos tener pobres. Y eso en Chile está claro, ¿no? La fuerza de esta naturalización, de esta forma de control que se nos instala a través de las fuerzas del norte global, previenen además, y mucho más gravemente, el reconocimiento de los signos del disentimiento. O sea, provocan, construyen esos muros, esa ceguera que permiten no ver, ¿no es cierto?, cómo se tensiona el orden. Entonces, lo que aparece acá interesante es la mirada de quienes han estado en la calle. Cito varias veces en esta presentación el trabajo de Aguilera, Carolina Aguilera y su equipo, que es un trabajo emergente, que por ahora está publicado en formas de columnas de opinión en un medio, y que se ha dedicado a indagar en esta no articulación tradicional de la manifestación callejera, tratando de abrir un camino distinto a las explicaciones tradicionales que buscaban el enemigo poderoso o que denuncian la anarquía como la imposibilidad de toda, con ello descalifican, digo, ¿no es cierto?, la propuesta de quienes están ahí. Entonces, lo interesante es esa manifestación a través de espacios no tradicionales de coordinación, de organización y de liderazgo, que de todas maneras logran transmitir y demostrar la expectativa o la esperanza de un orden distinto, y que es aquello que hay que indagar. La siguiente. Este es un tema muy interesante. Quise graficar la deterritorialización y la reterritorialización, el proceso de apropiación y reapropiación que se da en particular en el espacio concreto de la calle donde se manifiesta la protesta, ¿no? Es una plaza en el centro de Santiago, que es el espacio donde tradicionalmente se expresa la población, la comunidad, para todos los eventos que son dignos de celebración o de manifestación pública, y se celebran los éxitos futbolísticos, las conquistas políticas, etcétera, conocido tradicionalmente como la Plaza Italia, y ha sido el espacio donde se ha encontrado entonces hoy día la población en este estallido callejero. Ustedes han visto este espacio a través de muchas fotos, y lo interesante es cómo hoy día está en este proceso. Se pinta y se despinta casi a diario. Viene la manifestación y lo pinta de colores y pone ahí sus banderas, que son muchas, que no tienen una privilegiada, que cambian todo el tiempo, disfrazan al caballo, visten al general Baquedano, y en la noche vienen las fuerzas del orden, tenemos ahí la policía, y lo vuelven a pintar de un color homogéneo y vuelven a pintar al caballo de negro. Y en ese proceso estamos todos los días. Se apropia y se reapropia, se apropia y se reapropia, y existe una tensión además en el lenguaje, incluso uno lo puede ver en los medios, de no nos decidimos por nombrar la Plaza Dignidad, que es el nombre que le da la manifestación callejera, o Plaza Baquedano, que es el nombre que tiene tradicionalmente. Hoy día el periodismo se tensiona a sí mismo, ¿no?, a declararse y a empezar a decir Plaza Dignidad sin que tiemble la voz. Ese proceso es tremendamente interesante, porque no sabemos en qué va a quedar la plaza, ni con qué nombre, y si finalmente el nombre que tiene estampado ahí es el que la población usa y se apropia o no. Es un proceso interesante. Seguimos. Y el hasta que valga la pena vivir. Es un horizonte tremendamente interesante, y aquí lo que aparece hoy día relevante es el protagonismo de quienes participan, el protagonismo de ese grupo anónimo de la calle que se concentra en la calle, que no viene preorganizado de otra parte, que construye en la praxis de cada manifestación concreta su forma de articulación, el que aparece relevante. Entonces, eso nos invita a pensar un poco esta idea de los aprendizajes desde el sur, de qué estamos aprendiendo y de cómo podemos tomar flujos de experiencia que no provengan siempre de la misma parte, que no estén codificados siempre de la misma manera. Y yo quise tomar aquí para graficar esa experiencia el grupo Las Tesis, que me imagino que todos y todas habrán escuchado. Las Tesis es este grupo de performers chilenas que fueron las creadoras de la performance Un violador en tu camino, que se repitió extensivamente el año pasado, visibilizando la voz del feminismo en contra del patriarcado. Ellas son las 4 mujeres que están ahí de rojo, las creadoras de esta performance. ¿Qué es lo interesante de esta experiencia? Es que son 4 mujeres que se articularon un tiempo antes de las manifestaciones del 18 de octubre en Chile, y su intención era crear manifestaciones artísticas simples, performáticas, que pudiesen hacer asequible los contenidos relevantes del feminismo, sacarlos de la complejidad académica y llevarlos a la calle, a un espacio para que pudieran ser compartidos, asimilados y por supuesto entonces apropiados por todos y todas. Entonces la performance que las hizo famosas no es la primera que ellas hacen, para nada, es una más en una historia. Pero esa dio el golpe en el clavo, esa representó, dio voz en algún momento a una tensión, a un sentimiento que se hizo global o que ya era global. Entonces, en el fondo yo quisiera relevar acá la importancia, bueno, de un punto de partida, que es el feminismo en este caso, pero la articulación comunitaria, anónima y simple, a través de una performatividad en concreta, que fácilmente fue apropiada, que fácilmente fue traducida a todos los idiomas, que fácilmente fue intervenida si es que era necesario cambiar el lenguaje, las palabras, que se toma colectivamente. Entonces, a lo mejor esa experiencia nos permite pensar, ¿no es cierto?, los riesgos de la apropiación, las dinámicas en las cuales se da esta colonización, decolonización, recolonización y sus posibilidades globales y locales, la dinámica permanente de organizar, desorganizar y contraorganizar, y por supuesto prestar atención a todo aquello que se resiste a ser capturado y que debiera ser parte de las vías que debemos abrazar y articular. Eso, desde el sur. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Marcela. Great presentation. Gracias por tu presentación, es fantástica. Tenemos todos nosotros que discutir las posibilidades de organización y reorganización, de accounting and recounting also. Okay, Sanjay Lanka, please.
Okay, I think you can hear me. So I'm going to try and share my screen. So of course I will be, I think, slightly different. Just a second. Sorry. Oh. Okay. Okay, hopefully it's visible. So firstly, thank you everyone for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. So as you can see, everybody's been talking about the present. What I'm going to try and do is I've taken some notes about what was said earlier, and I'm going to try and bring some of the points made into my discussion, because obviously one of the weaknesses of inviting me is that I'm not really the expert on Latin America, right? Of course, I am based in Brazil, and so in full reflexivity of my own coloniality and my colonial experience, what I bring to you today is kind of a broader discussion of what is to be a colonial, what's the process of this colonization. And then, of course, because I am from India, I will talk to you more about the historiography of the colonization of India itself, because I think it's very important that we don't make this a very local thing, because as was said, we need a flow of information to go from the south to the north, from local to the global. So obviously, the local, there are many, right? The global is only one in the sense that it's the modernization of what we have to be. And of course, I talk about it in my teaching as what we call the McDonaldization of our lives, right? So everything becomes the same, all our food is the same, our cultures mingle, and we celebrate the disappearance of our unique cultures, right? So what I want to talk about, of course, today is kind of this process, how it started, what is the rationalization behind it, and then I would, because of time constraints, I'm not going to get into a discussion much about what I'm trying to do today, but I will end with a little connection back to Latin America very briefly, right?
Okay. I'll
So
just ask you to put on presentation mode your PowerPoint
okay,
slides.
sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. So let's start first with kind of a very interesting perspective. So what I'm talking about here, and I'll take a few minutes to explain this very complicated diagram. Some of you might be familiar with Burdell's idea of the birth of capitalism, right? So of course, this is coming from a book. Of course, I think you can't see the name of the book. This book is talking about what we call the cycles of accumulation. So I think one of the points that was made in the beginning was this idea of, I think what we're talking about is appropriation, right? And reappropriation. So what I'm showing you here is the cycles of appropriation and reappropriation going back to the 14th century. And of course, we're talking about, when we talk about colonization, we also have to remember that colonization doesn't happen by itself, right? There is a colonizer. And so what I'm trying to show you here is sort of the long cycles of different, you could say, cultural groups, different national groups. So we could say the Genoese, the started this process. Of course, the Genoese were more traders, but then in the 16th, 17th century, you see the period of the domination of the Dutch. And of course, here the connection very much is with South America, because if you remember, the Dutch were the bankers for the Spanish and the Portuguese. Although the colonization of South America happened at the hands of the Portuguese and the, I guess, Spanish, the banking and the capital, finance capital, was coming from the Dutch, right? And then, of course, the third period, which is, you know, the long 19th century, as it's called, is, of course, the rise of the British. And so my focus today is to look at what this British colonization was. And of course, this colonization is not just territorial, but I think the point that's being made is it's also about our minds and how we think, right? So here I am, a person who was born in India, grew up in different parts of the world, but I'm most comfortable, unfortunately, speaking in my alien language, English, right? So that's what I would call the theme of exile, right? So here I am, an Indian who speaks many languages, who's proud of my own culture, but unfortunately, I have to use the English language to express myself. And even today, and I think Alex made this point, this Western European kind of context in which we are having this discussion, I think that's one of the contradictions, right? And of course, today we can maybe talk a little bit about why this happened. And then this, hopefully we can maybe use this knowledge of why this happened to think about how we can prevent it from happening, because obviously we today are more aware of our situation because of our reflexivities, right? And of course, the current context is, you could see the period of, you could say, the imperialism. And I think that's an important word to use, because obviously colonization in the context of the relations of production is imperialism, right? And of course, everybody's familiar with how we can say that this period, the transition from the British to the American domination of the globe, and again, this is not just military domination anymore, right? This is cultural domination, the domination that's built on the power of the English language, you know, Hollywood, everything else, right? And this is where, you know, students, whether they are in Brazil or Colombia or India, they're all aspiring to this, you know, American life, right? So to go to America, to get freedom and to fulfill your potential. So this kind of discussion is made, but then on the other side, we have the relations in what we would call the global South, right? So this is kind of the context. And so what I'm focusing on today is, of course, authors from India. So that at least I have done. I try to focus on what has been said by Indians about Indian colonialism. And so this is a very good book by Ranajit Guha. And again, this is where I want to make a note to the subaltern movement, the subaltern studies movement. And I think, again, from an accounting point of view, because again, I'm speaking as an accounting academic, and I have used this idea of the subaltern, right? So in fact, I will be presenting a paper, I think later, where I'll also be talking, using this kind of perspective, right? So what we're talking about is how does coloniality impact not just, I think today we've talked about the academic and the practitioner, but what I would like to focus on is how does coloniality impact the marginalized, right? The indigenous people, the subaltern whose voice we often don't hear. And of course, I think that's where I am trying, of course, and I have to be careful here because I'm not saying I speak for them, but I would say that the important thing is to use methods of qualitative research, maybe ethnographies, where you can bring, present their point of view from their perspective, right? So bring their voice. And of course, how do we do more of that? And of course, I think we saw a little bit of that in Marcela's presentation, because this is about the people on the street, like in the Kaji, right? So what are they feeling, and how do we bring that into our understanding of what are the challenges? So going back to this article, so you can see this is about the historiography and the formation of a colonial state. So what I'm talking about here, and I'm not going to read from this because I just want to use this to give you context, right? So 1765 is when a corporation called the East India Company took over the management of India for the Mughal Empire, right? So most people don't know this fact. So there was a contract that the government of India basically gave the contract to a corporation and said, you can collect taxes, you can manage this whole country, right? And so this is the point where, and again, you can see the article talks about that the British colonialism was very different, because at that time, India was very popular. You had the Dutch, you had the French, you had the Portuguese, all having small pockets in India. So why were the British successful, right? So the success of the British is because they didn't just look at this as domination. They created laws, they created economic systems, and of course, they understood the politics, right? So when we talk about colonization, therefore, as management or accounting scholars, we have to go into the politics. We have to bring in the legal system that exists, because I believe, and I can show you today, and that's what I'm trying to show you, is that these structures of power, right? These structures of power that we have, even in what we believe is the post-colonized world, are actually the structures that were established in the process of colonization itself, right? So you can see here that this company basically became what we call the Divan. So the Divan means they're the prime minister. And so they started collecting taxes, and they started using land revenue and taxation. And this is where you can see I bring in the accounting part, right? So because obviously this is about public accounting, this is the collection of taxes. And so what we're talking about is that in this process, they changed the structure of Indian society. So how did they do that? And so I focus in that on another article where Ramachandra Guha talks about how forestry in India changed under the British. So again, I talk about this with my students in Brazil as well, because, you know, we take the Amazon maybe a little bit for granted sometimes, right? And so I tell them that think about that there was a forest as big as the Amazon, and it was around only 150 years ago, right? So think about an area that we call the Amazon basin, right? So that type of forest existed in India as recently as the 1850s and 60s. So it was from about the 1850s to the 1890s that the Amazon of India was cut down, right? And so this story that I'm telling you, again, I'm not going to get into much detail, but I would say that this was the process. Remember that colonization itself was because of the fact that Europe had destroyed its forest in the 16th century. There was no forest, right? So colonization was for those resources and what we call the extractive industries. We still have those extractive industries. We're still doing the same things, except that earlier we call it colonization. Now we call it development, right? So how is this different? And this is the challenge, right? So we have to understand And what I want to show you is that in this process of colonization slash development, the rights of the indigenous people that lived in the forests of India were taken away from them, right? So this is what the article is talking about. And so what we're talking about is that this process of forestry was also very much dependent on all the wars that the British fought in Europe. So people don't know this, but all the ships that the British Navy built were from the deodar forests of the Himalayas of India, right? So imagine a whole area the size of, I guess for us in Latin America, imagine an area the size of Minas Gerais is cut down in just 5 years, right? So that's the level of, this cutting down. So how was it presented? So this is the other story. And I'm going to just, so this is, of course, the early period of British rule. But what I want to focus on here on this slide, and hopefully you guys can see this. So this is the railway expansion in India, right? So 1853 to 1910, you can see the growth of the railways. In 1853, it was only 32 kilometers. But by 1910, India had 51,000 kilometers of railway lines. And even today, in the world, India has the second largest railway network after Canada, right? So why was this built? So the presentation of discourse would be development. Oh, we developed India, we built the railways. And there are still people in India who thank the British for the railway system, right? But what is ignored in this discourse of development and the railways as the means to development is what was the price paid, right? And so these were the laws that were enacted. So we still have this law. It's called the Sedition Law, which was enacted in 1890. And the current Indian government in 2020 has still used the Sedition Law today, right? So when manifestations like what Marcela showed in Chile happen in India last year and this year against the new laws which are being created, the government can take away those people and they disappear for months, right? Even today, but using the laws that were created by the British in the 1890s, right? So this is what I'm talking about, that the connection between coloniality and post-coloniality, right? So the structures haven't changed. So what I want to show you here as well is this idea that the destruction of the environment was looked at as development. Of course, the forest department was created, and you will see that the railways was created again by cutting down all of these very important trees, timbers, and of course, you can say that this story is still being repeated, right? So I will pause with the story of the historiography, and what I want to do is transition to the story of maybe modern India. And so I want to introduce to you the Adivasi. So Adivasi is an Indian term for indigenous people, right? So they were the original inhabitants of India. And of course, what you're seeing is that now in India, we have these forests where the Adivasis still live. And we have the conflict between the Indian state and what we call the Naxalites, who are the people who have picked up the guns, right, and protecting this region. Again, it's very controversial, obviously, but this is, again, the reality of what we call the post-colonial state, right? Because the post-colonial state is still treating its indigenous people as a colonizer, right? So this process of cultural colonization, because again, this is based on the culture of my English education, my foreign education, and then people like me going back to India and then telling people how to live their lives, how we are going to develop them because they don't know how to live, right? So this is, and just to give you some numbers, so again, India's population 1.4 billion, and we're talking about 85 million people who are what we call scheduled tribes. And just like in South America, we have these protected reserves, right? So these are places supposedly for them that nobody else can touch these parts, right? And so these are about 70 million of them in the heart of India. And unfortunately, just like in South America, these forests are where we have our mineral resources, right? So where we are seeing today, large multinational corporations may be owned by Indian businessmen with foreign passports, of course, that allow them to come back to India, and then they are given these lands by the government because the government wants development. The government wants foreign direct investment. So this FDI approach, where the rights of the local people are not considered, is the new form of colonialism, right? This is the colonization of the urban elites of the rural and the people living in the countryside. So you can see here that we have this problem of inequality. Again, these are issues that I think we can talk about with South America as well. You know, the inequalities of lack of access to basic things like health facilities, education, uh, in terms of, you know, how if you're wealthy, middle class, your education is so different. And if you're not, then obviously it's a whole other story. It's a different world, right? So this is where, again, we are also seeing about displacement. So this is after the 1990s, and I think this relates to what happened in Chile, and I think we can discuss this more because we are living in the neoliberal phase, right? So this neoliberal phase started in India in the 1990s, and the development has led to the about 20 million people losing their houses, losing their villages, you know, millions of acres that have been covered by these huge dams that have been constructed, right? So again, you might have heard about the construction of dams in India. And of course, these are only 8% of the population of India, but you can see that their whole life has been appropriated and continues to be appropriated. Right, so this is what we are seeing, and of course, this is where again those lands are being appropriated and given away to either Indian companies or foreign companies. So again, this is the new version of colonization, and I will just wrap up here by saying again the connection to again the new industry, right? So we're talking about, well, guess what? We want to all start driving Teslas. I don't know if you all saw the tweet from Elon Musk, but he said he will attack Bolivia and take its lithium, right? So he said this just a few months ago on Twitter. And you can see that on this map, this area between Chile, Bolivia, and the north of Argentina is going to be the region where 49% of the lithium production already is coming from South America. And guess what? If we are all going to be driving electric cars in our new, you know, carbon neutral world, guess what? We're still going to need extractive industries, right? So I think it's important in that context to make that connection that, you know, we do protect the rights of indigenous people, and we have to think about how are we going to bring their perspective back into the conversation. So thank you for the opportunity to present my ideas, and of course, I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Sanjay. It is amazing in your presentation how we still have a continuing process of colonization on a new basis, but with the same local elite, with international interests, and in a highly colonizing process, despite any sort of movement try to avoid it or to contradict it. Thank you for your presentation. We had quite fantastic presentations here. Alex and Anya talking about the idea of recolonization, trying to rethink reflectively about our managerial practices within business schools, within our actions in teaching and engaging with social movements. And I would like to have this as a starting point on how can we, this is an issue, at least for me, on how can we be critical scholars, trying to decolonize, trying to avoid European Western enlightenment and European Western theoretical frames, to rethink and to act and to enact a different sort of organizing in the South. So I would like to ask you to engage in this conversation, and probably Alex has some words on about Marcela or Sanjay presentations, because when I see your presentations, I can imagine how it was a deep process within BNDES that was held during at least 4 or 5 years, if I am not wrong. And now, Anna, you at BNDES are in a new administrative context, and you're probably are facing a change in all that effort that you have done. And I would like to hear a little bit more on if your team, if the group that participated in that process of delegitimizing a univocal voice, of reflecting on managerial practices, how is BNDES now, and those people, those persons that directly worked with you trying to explore creativity, if anything of this is still there, and how are you handling under this Bolsonaro managerial reorientation or mass that is created? So that's my question to Ana. And to Marcela, it's fantastic. Es fantástica como las posibilidades de organización y reorganización, como hablé, de contagen, recontagen, se es posible en Latinoamérica, al mismo tiempo dar voz a los grupos. Y también gostaria que tú hablases un poquito más sobre la violencia de Estado contra estos movimientos, como nosotros que tenemos que trabajar con management and accounting and institutions, and we are within institutions, cómo podemos comprender y resignificar estos movimientos y las contradicciones, inclusive la violencia de Estado, cómo criticarla y cómo reposicionar los movimientos. ¿Sí? ¿Quién quieres comenzar? Ana, Alex, Sanjay,
Okay.
Marcela. Sí, sí.
Okay, that's okay for me. How can I say? I think it's today it becomes harder, but the managerist way it's from, I think since I'm there in BNDES 20 years ago that I started being a manager and an executive, because that's the way management education is. What I'm bringing here that we should think about it. There's lots of scholars that thinking about this critical management a long time ago, and I felt I nowadays it's worse because it's so market driven that you don't have space to think differently. So the way we try to bring this, as I said, is subliminal. We have to be tactical and take the ideas they want. Sometimes if they talk about sustainability as a goal, okay, could be good. So how can I use such goals that I can say, no, that's okay, I can do something good on this, but do it in a slight different way, and then you can gain some space with those alternatives. Because as executive on a daily basis, you have to take some decisions very quickly every day. So I should say that I don't avoid, as you said, Fernanda, the colonial ideas or the Western. I use them. We can colonize them also. So I take all those ideas. I see what can work in the way that I think it's good. Sometimes the problem is how you do it. So how can I use those ideas? How can I do it without trying not to, as I said, harness or make it worse the inequalities? Sometimes it's hard because I work in a capitalist country. I work as a bank. So sometimes you, as I said, we have to go with the flow. I know that I'm being acted upon, but being aware of this, as I said, I can go with the flow, but I can do little waves, like when you're a rower, you use the rower a little bit different, so you don't go straight to the waterfall. I can try to go to the margin and take a bike. So I may say is a little bit, it's hard to say, but it's a little bit like this. When I have a demand, I maybe cannot agree with the way it should be, then I try to bring lots of other ideas and I bring my team. We work together on those problems and see how can you think different and try to give another answer, but an answer that I can show them, no, we can achieve what we're saying. Because to achieve a green country, to achieve a more a less unequal country, it's not the wrong. They don't say that's wrong. They say they want this. So okay, let's see how can we do, and we negotiate a little bit. So it's a negotiation each day and not avoiding anything. I think that's why the dynamics of colonization, decolonization, it's both sides. Sometimes we colonize, sometimes we decolonize, recolonize, and we have just to deal with that. The tensions are good to go further. We criticize ourselves. Even decolonization can be critically bad sometimes. So how can we work with that to reach something? That's the way I live every day. I don't know if I answer you.
Yeah, sure. Alex, any compliments? Any addition? Your mic is muted.
No, that's fine. Yeah, sure. Well, well, okay, let's put it this way. I know to some extent I have been acting as a kind of insider in Anna's struggles and the settings that she has been dealing with those dynamics. So I would just say that this issue of negotiation that she mentions perhaps might just be reframed by something, let's say, more practical and especially more collective in a sense, given that Anna is one of those few ones struggling this way within this organization. Well, but this organization is said to be a public one, and apparently, well, the ones who have a contract to work in this organization can be not joined by others who would like to have this organization as a possibility realm of struggle. So what I'm trying to say is that we might somehow also find some way of negotiating those boundaries that we call the boundaries set by the organization itself, in which our field of organization management is very much complicit, to find some other way of reinventing this public possibility or collective possibility of dealing with those dynamics much beyond the individual that we call Ana Costa.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. And this is why we cannot talk about decolonizing, but recolonizing. And we are consuming and reproducing and trying to move beyond and to change it on a daily basis. But we are within a structure, a external and major structure that keeps us in the same logic, despite the collective engagements and trying to change it. Yes, I agree. And under the current context of Bolsonaro in Brazil, and also the changes that we wanted to have become in our institutions, this is a challenge for us, how to make it alive and still going on. And
could I just add something to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So I just wanted to kind of respond to what Anna was talking about, and I obviously, I teach accounting, and I teach, but I teach sustainable finance and accounting, and I think I want to kind of respond to this challenge, you could say, of trying to make these changes within being what we call the capitalist system. And I think the point that Anna made earlier in her presentation about the importance of this ESG perspective, I think is very important, because obviously I teach a course about ESG, and of course I talk about ESG a lot in my accounting and finance class, and where I see the opportunity going forward, because we have these structures, we have these companies which own these resources, and the point that we're seeing, and again, this is kind of what's happening in Bolsonaro's Brazil, is because the Selic rate is so low, Brazilians are buying shares in Brazilian companies. And because of issues like, what has happened with JBS and, with the investigation of its practices in the Amazon and the Cerrado, foreign investors are selling Brazilian stock this year, right? So at some point, there will be again, this is quote unquote the market system that supposedly works, right? So the idea, I think, is the younger people in Brazil, and I'm very excited about it, they are starting to realize that ESG is not just about discourse, but they want to see praxis, right? And they are the people who will have to make this change. Their decisions about investment are going to hopefully make a difference, right? Again, I'm trying to be positive here. Of course, it's very easy to take this all in a negative way as well, right? But I think the opportunity, therefore, is for really taking this idea of ESG seriously. And of course, I'll be presenting a paper later today where I will talk a little bit about the methodology of what we call a social audit, right? So we need to audit our supply chains. We need to audit the, you could say, the governance structures of companies, especially within the board of directors. And I attended a very interesting meeting last Friday with a group from CalPERS. So this is a large pension fund, and the head of the CalPERS was talking about the problem in the annual report itself. So she says that the narrative part of the annual report says all these wonderful things about sustainability, but then when it comes to the financial statements, there's no mention of climate change risk. There is no mention of human capital and how you're going to manage it, right? So I think these are the things. I'm happy to engage in a conversation again with Anna, because I think this is where the banks are giving the loans. They have to play the role of kind of the policeman to ensure that these funds which are going in the name of development and projects, are they really following these regulations, right? And I think that's where the role of government comes in. And again, we need a government that's not just lip service to being accountable, but it has to be accountable, right?
We have some questions here, considering that we started with Anna's presentation and discussion. Rosinelli said in the chat, "This speech of Anna reminds me of the situation that many of us found ourselves in public organizations. Sometimes we have to deal with impositions of management tools, and we have to rethink those tools and give them a new meaning." And Marcela says, "Is recuperating the idea of the reflexive practitioner, especially in neoliberal times." So it is a way in which we are also, there's a question from Cleia Silva, how you and BNDES, an organization that is inserted in a neoliberal agenda in the current government, how are you specifying this dynamic of colonization, recolonization? How can you, in her issues, how is the agenda going on inside the organization, how to deal with this? And Silvia Nova is saying, yes, regaining our agency somehow by resisting, negotiating, denouncing. I think, Cleia, this is the answer to your question, but if anyone wants to jump in and comment on that topic, please.
I think the agenda, as I said, they say that is the ESG agenda, is the infrastructure agenda. I say the aim is they're there, but how? It's by privatization, is the faith that the market will solve everything. So the market-driven solutions are on this. Okay, let's just prepare to make things very well done, so the market can go on, and they will solve everything. That's why in my speech I put my concern on the ideals of democracy, of citizenship, because if you just hold on market, even when we talk about ESG, my concern is who is these investors? In Brazil, there are very few people. So they're gonna rule? Where's democracy? That's why we should put our institution, public institution, more democratize our institution also, because I am myself and my team, we are a technocracy also. So how can you deal with democracy and how can we do not lose the ideals of welfare state? They are important, and they can give citizenship. I think Maybe we can say the liberal democracy is not working anymore, but how can we rethink democracy? I think maybe that's another point of view we should think about. And I think the way we're going, and that's the problem, because they start talking about ESG, okay, then I start studying a lot about it and try to bring critical views and try to put this info, try to make the use of instruments in a way differently if I just let them go. Let I stay doing the waves, trying to not make the flow go to the waterfall. More or less like this.
There is a question from the audience. Two questions. One from Professor Pierre Rayon, when he's talking about that the most revolutionary technology or thought is ineffective without a change in organization spirit, a cultural change, a managerial change. And we have Paulo Homero commenting that he thinks that maybe post-colonialism is a little bit too performatic. It seems concerned with prescribing guidance for well behavior, especially for academic, but it does not offer solutions or ways of transforming or overcoming capitalism. What are your positions regarding this critique to post-colonialism or decolonialism? Can we make a structural change from it?
Maybe if I can respond to that briefly, what I see, the idea is, first of all, I don't believe there is a post, right? We're still living in colonialism in a way, right? I think that the only changes that we have, the systems of government have been modified, and I would say it's not really, it's a very superficial change. Right? And I agree 100% with what Anna's saying there, because I think there we have to look at our systems of democracy. And again, the system of accountability of the government to its people, finally, right? Because the idea that you have independence, of course, the states of Latin America have been independent technically for a long time. And so the independence of what we call the post-colonial is not really any change, right? So the structures of production, who owns the money, the role of the elites have all not changed, right? So essentially, we're still living in the same moment, but we are given the right to vote. So again, that's where the democracy has a role to play. But again, my criticism of this, and I don't speak only for Brazil, I speak for India, I speak for maybe even the US, and that why are not good people, smart people getting into politics? You know, and I think this is a debate I saw in the last election in Brazil, right? The choice of candidates is not consistent with the quality of people in Brazil, right? So why don't people, because here we are sitting and talking about all these wonderful things that we need to happen. And I think finally people like us have to take part in the political process, or be, you know, much more, you know, really reactive, right? Revolutionary, than join the political process. And I think this is the challenge, and this is where you will see this kind of connection between, you know, democracy and you know, management and academics, and all of these things will come together.
Alex? Marcela, please join the conversation.
Thank you. I can follow the flow and try to answer your question, Fernanda, about the state violence. And I think it's related. In Chile, this kind of violence has been really, really hard and explicit and difficult to challenge in the last years. I mean, all of you already know a lot of blind people coming from street manifestations, and we receive international reports denouncing that, and our government, our institutions still refuse to recognize that. So it is difficult to understand how to bridge the gap between I don't know, different conceptions of democracy. I mean, it's a kind of you know, two two different countries, what is happening in the streets, what is people saying or aspiring or needing, and what is happening institutionally. In Chile, you can see a different country if you follow media or television, traditional ways. They are picturing different issues that what is happening outside that. And this was quite relevant during our last national consultant process, the plebiscite, in which the great majority said we really want to change constitution. It was the question, and just a small group of people say no, we want to remain the same. It was also a particular group of people living in a particular part of the city in Santiago, close to rich people, people in charge of making decisions in the country. And the thing is that in our country, the majority is strictly ruled by a small group of people. And this is really difficult to change, because nowadays, despite the majority said we want to change that, they insist to colonize now in the current process positions to rewrite the constitution. So, and the question is, or they say that we need experts to do that. And the favorite example of people is how we can put, I don't know, a housewife in that position. I mean, housewife is now the metaphor of someone who don't know, of someone who is not important, or someone who is not representing the real needs of people. So I think that the challenge is to subvert this kind of violence. Of course, we have a physical violence against our people here in Chile, but what is pervasive is the permanent violence of trying to, I don't know, remain private, the right to think, the right to decide, the right to say. I mean, not to understand that the practice of democracy is radical at the very end. I mean, we need the voice of everyone present in all of this process, because that it is. I mean, we are a diverse group of people, and we need the voice of the housewife, because at the very end, this is the real place in which things happens, and they are in charge of the real accountability process. I mean, the process that maintain the materiality of life. So we have to subvert the terms in which we are delivering the conversation. And in order to do that, we have to offer positions in the table to all of us. I mean, without Anna here, it could be impossible for us to listen and to dialogue with practitioners. Our conversation should be about universities and academia and theoretical issues and blah, 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 blah. And we talk on behalf of them. I mean, this is the real challenge, and it is really, really difficult because it's about to, I don't know, to paint again the square of dignity and open the places. And of course, due to the risk violence, all of us, we are threatening, and there is a risk today to lose your eyes, your life, your position, your work, if you say something different. I mean, it's not just a comfortable conversation here using Zoom. It's a praxis also. So we have to consider that, I think.
Fantastic. Fantastic talk, Marcela. The violence gaining another dimension from the top and within our intimate professional careers and senses. Alex, please.
Yes, for sure. I'll engage with. It's amazing. Yeah, sure. One of the things that calls my attention is for us to think that Anna is a practitioner and we are not. I'm a manager, actually. I have been managing. I have been managing the academic setting for a long time, so I'm very much a practitioner. It's just that we don't have to use the right of any other language, given the censorship that we impose on ourselves, that we have to be the ones, and then they become the others. By the way, with this issue of the ones and the others, it comes out of this question by Fernando. I mean, how is it to be critical by, as people say, delinking from the Eurocentric legacy, which is one of those, I don't know, seductive ideas that the academics impose on themselves, or perhaps they, as if we are different from the capitalism itself that we are trying to criticize. So, given the content of this panel, I would dare to say that it's not the case of delinking or get rid of Eurocentrism. I think it's very much on struggling, on an everyday struggle, and of reappropriating, given that this Eurocentric legacy does not belong to Europe. It belongs to a community, a large community, much beyond the academy, by the way. So we should not even consider raising this question as academics, because we might be very much part of the problem. All this Eurocentric stuff belongs to a totality, a majority that is not invited even for us to reappropriate, given that apparently we are superior to practitioners and those others. So that's why when people ask about the post-colonialism ineffectiveness, part of that is because this post-colonialism that we have, it's an appropriation of white male academic university institutions. There are many post-colonialism everywhere, but there is a big appropriator. There is a huge appropriator. And that's part of our capitalism. And it's impossible to accumulate without this machine that we call the university, as if it represents goodness. Of course it doesn't. And it does not represent goodness also because critique does not represent goodness at all. It's all in terms of those simultaneity that somehow we have been deprived from even being trained to act as practitioners within the university. So it's very concerning in those terms. I mean, the incapacity of academics of playing this game. But I mean, it's not the end of history. Actually, that's why we're here. That's why we should keep struggling. And in the case of Anna, which is a very practical problem created and or reproduced by the academy, this lady, Anna, she works as a development administrator. And if you look for any place for us to, invite people to become development administrator in the matrix of the university and management schools in Brazil, you're not going to find a site. I mean, this field has been dismantled. And this field has been dismantled and replaced by management, organization, knowledge of management, and organization, I don't know, studies. But, I mean, it has been done at the expense of development administration. So, yes, we are, of course, central part of the problem that we try to address. So it means that we owe much, especially for the absent in this debate. I mean, and I'm thinking about, again, of Galpão, Applause, and some other people who are not capable of even touching, the exteriority of the university. And sometimes I think, well, like them, that they are not even touching the exteriority of the university. So perhaps that is the place where hope still exists. Anyway, I'm not being pessimist, but I think that this kind of word is necessary for us to keep moving rather than being moved. Because if Anna is being acted upon, well, we're being acted upon as well. We're together, Anna.
Yeah.
And apparently we think that we are superiors.
Yeah, superiority. Our ivory towers need to be deconstructed and to change this logic of functioning within the academia and separating praxis and practitioners and thinkers, for sure. Wow. This panel is so mind-blowing, so many ideas from in terms of coloniality and recoloniality within organizations, within structures, within states, in social movements. There are so many aspects through which we can think our role. People are here thinking about identity crisis. What are we? Are we practitioners, intellectuals? I don't know. I think that it is a process of reflecting of our praxis as scholars, and decoloniality would allows us to rethink in terms of the coloniality of minds, the coloniality of bodies, the coloniality of engagements. And I think it is an ongoing process that we need to embrace and try to transform our praxis on a daily basis, continually in our daily activities. As practitioners, scholars, as you mentioned, doublé. We are acting the same both times. And we approach our 2-hour limit, but I really don't want to end this panel. I think we have too many aspects. We still have some questions from the audience. There is one that is quite complicated and it's talking about coloniality and recoloniality within QRCA. Tenemos mucho. Marcela respondió privadamente a Mary. I'm going to read the question. I think it is an important issue for us to have it, discuss it here to end our session on QRCA. Quoting Mary, some Latin American researchers claim that QRCA initiative is a colonizing or recolonizing initiative, highlighting the language issues, the participation of researchers from the North, also criticizing the CPA journal role or any other journal role. It promotes a community building project. That's the main idea of QRCA. We that are here trying to promote the conference is the idea of building a community, building bridges north-south, south-south, including a variety of topics and special interest for Latin American researchers. So question about Mary, what is your opinion about those claims of coloniality and recoloniality? Do we need that labeling or as an academic project that is engaging, that is trying to transform our academic practices? I would like to listen a little bit for us to rethink our role and our praxis as academic scholars trying to develop a conference.
I don't know, but what came to my mind was when I always struggling with my accounting people that make the ratings from the companies we have to loan. And as we know, we study sectors and we know the way they work. And then when you go to the rating people and they just put the same old KPIs, the same old way of seeing things. So the EBITDA and everything like this. And sometimes I have to say, but in this sector, it's different. The EBITDA is feel like this because they in the value chain they're the weakest. So of course all the things that they're gonna pay is with this guy. So you can read this guy, this size of company or this company, this value chain that way. or if they are normally they are in the value chain of a multinational, it's worth and worst. And so if you read like this, we just put this guy aside. They don't get the loan because the way we're seeing it's not so high level, but it doesn't talk with what happened, the power relation, the politics. That's why I think that's something that I am always doing lots of meeting with those teams from the rating. Most of them are accountants, trying to put this and say we can review a little bit this because it's not fair, and sometimes it works. But I think it's something we should really think, even in economy, not so an accounting economy, in management, because economists, they normally think they're not a social science, but math science, and it's STEAM. No, it's not a STEAM, but they think they are. Yeah, so no, we are social science, and I think we must talk in that way.
Yes. Thanks. Marcela, please.
Gracias. Esta respuesta merece volver a hablar en español.
Sí, gracias.
Iba a decir, hacer un comentario respecto, bueno, de que a lo mejor une un poco todo. Estamos teniendo acá una conversación tremendamente interesante, pero nuevamente, y digo nuevamente porque lo hemos hecho antes, nos estamos juntando a conversar acerca de estos temas en una plataforma y en una modalidad que, ¿cómo decir?, que es prestada, o sea, nos tomamos de un espacio que no construimos desde acá para hablar desde una mirada crítica, criticamos o subvertimos ese propio espacio, pero todavía nos falta a lo mejor pensar que debemos encontrarnos a través de otras iniciativas también. O sea, hablamos de colonialidad, decolonialidad y recolonialidad en un idioma distinto, en una plataforma académica distinta que no está construida ni por nosotros, ni desde nosotros, ni para estos efectos. Y hemos ido teniendo estas conversaciones en varios espacios de este tipo, y algunas de esas han avanzado un poco más allá al punto de incluso hacer desaparecer ese espacio por la imposibilidad de la conversación sosteniéndola ahí. Entonces siento que ahí se nos abre el tema. Busquemos cómo encontrarnos en esta conversación donde no seamos la ama de casa invitada a la conversación de los expertos, y donde reflexionemos también acerca de por qué nos consideramos también practitioners en este tema, porque hablamos de nuestra propia práctica, de nuestra forma de organizar la academia y nuestra forma de organizar la circulación de la conversación y las ideas. Es esto también lo que hay que desmantelar. Sin lugar a dudas, muy valioso esta conversación y la que hemos tenido antes y las que vamos teniendo. Pero la pregunta es si seguimos necesitando estos espacios o podemos construir también otros.
Sí. Comparando, I was speaking in English, although I will mix Portuguese and Spanish, it will be crazy. Comparing Laemos and QRCA, what I see as different is that we started with a push from one of our colleagues with an editor with the idea of, okay, let's start a conversation. What do you think about a workshop? Few colleagues, we're gonna discuss. And it started with the journal. It started with their structure and their budget for travels and things. But now the conference has has been appropriated by local scholars. I think that that practice has increased, has engaged more people, more colleagues. So now we have more reviewers, more debaters, more discussants. We have a larger community of Latin American scholars engaged in QRCA than the proper structure from the journal. It is different from Laemos because Laemos was using Eagle's structure, Eagle's name, during at least 10 years, and then when close to 10 years, and when it ended, you had to rebuild everything. And on QRCA, we are still in this main administrative role, but we are trying to keep it as our endeavor to have the reviewing process. Maybe we are building our own ivory tower within the academia, within the intellectuals, but trying to engage with in our practices as managers of academia, but having it in a more open way and reappropriating and rethinking some ways of doing things. But I don't know if it's well read or understood by other colleagues that are still keeping the idea of we are being colonized. No, we are appropriating ourselves of some modes of thinking or rethinking some modes of thinking, of engaging, and trying to build our own network, our own community of scholars. So I think we are not struggling with that sort of issue that at the same pace that happened in last Laemos, but it is a tension, and I think that this process of colonization and recolonization is full of tensions. It's impossible to avoid it. I don't know. I don't know. Is it enough, Mary? Did you like my response? And Marcela and Anna. Alex, any comments on that? Sanjay, any comments? Please,
well,
Alex.
I think that, yeah, I'm talking about my experience anyway, rather than trying to impose any kind of theoretical understanding of this situation. All the situations that I lived, I mean, similar to this one, suggests that it does not matter much. Does not mean that it does not matter, but it does not matter much the intentions of individuals when we're talking about those systems. Of course, I mean, it does, but right. So, and also, so that's an issue. I mean, your intention of being anti-colonial does not mean that you're being anti-colonialist, because it's like structural racism. I mean, we have been talking about the structural racism. So, I mean, it's there. The colonial condition is there. I mean, if you are from within the academic setting, it's more obvious that you are a member of this. So, anyways, so at this stage, I don't think that the issue is to say, well, I'm not colonizing. Yes, you are. Yes, we have been. For us to start the conversation with some kind of otherwise positionality or more practical issue. The second issue that calls my attention is the absence of training of those. I have been involved in lots of international exchange and dialogue without any training. I do not know what I'm doing most of the time. We just think that the academic world is good, and then we navigate thinking that we are good because that's the kind of message, that's the identification that somehow have been imposed on us on this goodness. But of course, it's a big problem. Anyway, so there is no goodness in this business, and it's not a problem. And finally, there is another issue. Also, in my experience, internal colonialism is so evil that sometimes it's not just bad business being colonized by the benevolent empire. Sometimes you have to navigate in those terms. And it happens everywhere. I mean, I'm not talking about internal colonialism just in the colonies, but also in the metropolitan center. Sometimes when I flew to the center and people say, oh, Alex, let's see how you bring some interesting ideas. It's also a claim for them. They do not know, because it's less clear, that they are also colonized by this empire. So this empire is everywhere, but I mean, we still face some difficulties to admit, and also in our case on how to make it available, those practices and those reflections on those practices that have been dismantled and denied by the professional university and academy. So I think that this panel and this our trying of insisting without knowing exactly where it's gonna head, this is that I think it's necessary for us to re-engage with all those faces of coloniality, racism, patriarchy, capitalism. Those things are all the time everywhere. It constitutes us all the time. It's not a matter of, no, now, today I don't want to capitalize, today I don't want to patriarchalize, today I don't want to colonize. I mean, I understand
This space is free from this.
Yeah. This willingness of the sovereign individual who is capable of subverting and building agents. Well, I love those ideas, but they're not very much practical. And the empire knows about this. That, I mean, they have more training than us. It's very much asymmetrical. So I'm claiming for, I mean, all these issues of colonizing, they are experts. They just do not tell us.
Okay, right. Having that said, it's hard to continue aiming any sort of pureness in our academic work, in our academic thinking. Oh, I follow a stream of criticality that is purer than the other one, or is naive or innocent than the other one. There is not such a thing. We are part of that system that colonizes and recolonizes practices, even if we are critical scholars. So if we are engaged with the subalternized other that is not inside our ivory tower, if we are open to the other, but it is important to have this critical thinking, that critical standpoint. At least we can recognize and rethink. We are engaging for what? To produce a paper, to publish a paper about a rural community, about a group of dancers, about a social movement. We are going to publish it in a journal. They are not going to read it. So we have to, at least, we have to rethink how these practices with them can help us to rethink our practice within the journals if we are on a structure that we have to keep balancing those struggles all the time. We have to deliver imperial content, deliver to the imperial system of metrics, while we can engage in cultural issues, on local issues with local groups and practitioners and practitioners as we are. So there's no easy question, and I think that's the main idea of this panel, was to open our eyes to that idea that we're just trying to have it, mestizos and mestizas, everyone. Great points, Alex. Great points, Ana, Marcela, Sanjay. Thank you for your talk, your presentations here. Not only in Latin America, in India, in Africa, everywhere that we are talking about decolonization and recolonization. We have our role and in this process, and we have to rethink it. Yes, yes. I don't have words to thank all of you that are here doing it again, Alex, the conversation that you opened in Academy of Management. And I know that lots of colleagues from everywhere would like to join this conversation. I think that we should have, we have a group, the Colonizing Alliance on Facebook, but it's more changing materials on Facebook and ideas and thoughts. And I think that we should keep that conversation open in different forums, and rethinking our praxis as scholars, as in a world that the last we can do, the utmost of our work is to have this double side of criticality and engaging and recognizing our limitations to do so. So thank you all. I really appreciate for you to be here, considering that we are in a not so good moment. We have our personal struggles, our losses, the darker side of this pandemic that is affecting all of us and the society, the groups that are not here present at this conference, that does not have internet or Zoom accounts, and knowing that you all attended this call for talking about this double side, being colonized and decolonizing at the same time. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't have words. I don't know how to end this panel.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Continuar
Obrigado.
conversando.
Sí,
Sí,
sí.
muchas gracias y sí,
Até a
estamos en
próxima.
contacto.
Gracias.
Bye.
Muchas gracias.
Tchau,
See
tchau.
you. Tchau, tchau.
Tchau, tchau.
Fernanda, estamos
Sim.
muito agradecidos a você, né? Tanto no Critical Management, no Academy, quanto aqui. Estamos muito agradecidos.
Obrigada, Alex. Digamos que é um trabalho voluntário de dedicação à comunidade para se repensar, né? Que não é trivial, né, Marcela? Organizar o evento e lidar com as críticas, né, da própria comunidade que fazem a gente repensar nosso trabalho. O último painel, the last panel of the conference on Thursday afternoon. Please be here. We're going to talk about building bridges, challenges of building bridges in Latin America, on how to build knowledge, not only knowledge, but practices that are diverse. So please engage with us. Today, just a little publicity here, we have another panel on digital populism. It is fantastic because we are having people from political science and sociology to discuss how internet and the media is changing our political way of seeing things and controlling and everything. So please be here 3 p.m. With Marcelo Castaneda, Letícia Cesarino, and Moisés. We're going to discuss digital populism. We have 2 sessions today, more panels tomorrow. We have a panel on decolonial feminism tomorrow. Also, please, Marcela, be here with us, Ana, Alex, and Sanjay. We have a lot of sessions, a lot of ideas coming in and going out and engaging within building bridges in Latin America. See you. Thank you, everyone, for being here, the audience. Sorry for not answering all those questions. We're going to respond later in other forums. Thank you, thank you, thank you all.